Hello, everyone. Welcome to Big Apple Film Festival mentoring and networking session. We're here with Natalie Goldberg today. She's going to speak about documentaries. It's a Q&A, so if this is your first one, which I don't think it is anybody's, you use the raised hand emoji to ask a question, and you can ask at any time. Natalie will give a brief intro on herself, and then we can start getting into questions. So welcome, Natalie.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Sorry about my funny background, by the way. I have a sick dog today, and she's sitting right at my feet and will only sit next to the couch. So that's why there's like a huge Smiths poster in the background on an orange couch. But very nice to meet all of you. So yeah, I can kind of, give some background. I've sort of had my hands in a lot of different things in both the documentary and scripted space. So really, I'm kind of open to questions, that run the gamut, even if it's not this exact topic. I started really in the talent agency world. I was an assistant at Innovative Artists and UTA and worked with actors and, the craziness that is, very Entourage-esque, which is kind of maybe a dated reference now. But I really started in that world and really enjoyed it. Weirdly enough, I think I'm in a very small group of people that actually liked it. And I worked there for a while, and then I went to work at Gloria Sanchez Productions, which at that time was run by both Will Ferrell and Adam McKay. They were still partners at the time. And Jessica Elbaum was just getting that female-led arm off the ground. It was sort of that time where, Booksmart was sent to us for the first time. The Hustlers article was sent to us for the first time, a really sort of exciting developmental time in the company. And it was very interesting, but I sort of wanted to get my hands a little dirtier in terms of full-on physically producing material. And I went to a company called Delirio Films, which is actually run by Jessica Elbaum's husband, Rafi Marmor. And they mostly focus on documentary features, documentary series, with a couple of scripted projects. They did Honey Boy, which was really exciting to sort of be in the early script development phases of. And some of the docs, that you guys might know, very most recently, actually, the Will Ferrell road trip documentary just got into Sundance. If you guys have been keeping up with, the list of things that got in, that's sort of their biggest, I think, splash that's about to happen. And then prior to that, documentary feature about Reggie Jackson from the MLB, doc series about Magic Johnson. One of my favorites, a feature doc called Mike Wallace is Here, about Mike Wallace's life, all through archival footage. Mike Wallace of 60 Minutes, for those of you who are familiar. So I've done a ton of, doc and scripted development. I've done quite a bit of physical production and budgeting as well in the doc space, and I've had my hands in all of it. I think that's sort of a common trait of documentary in general. So I'd love to I'm open to questions, if people have questions like on the production side, if people have it on the development side, I'm happy to just sort of take it wherever and provide any other info from my side as well. I don't know if Andy, if that worked as an intro, but let me know.
That Alan wants to ask a question. So
yeah. Hi, Alan.
Thank you, Andy. And thank you, Natalie. You're exactly the person I need to speak to right now. I'm actually I was just brought on as a producer on a documentary, a full-length documentary that's already been shot.
Wow.
But still needs some post-production work and marketing. And the subject is about female musicians in the jazz world.
Cool.
And so this document, and actually my sister happens to be one of the interviewees, but the guy, I'm working with the director who was his idea. He went all over the world, did all these interviews. So now he's got everything shot. He's trying to edit it himself, but he needs like a couple $100,000 to finish. Mm-hmm. So how can you who would you approach? I mean, I've actually approached some distributors and actually some actors who I know are jazz buffs.
Yeah.
Like Brad Pitt and Clint Eastwood. Haven't got any response yet, but we just started. How do you
What
approach
should you
that?
do?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, if
I
it's
actually,
yeah,
yeah, honestly, I actually think your second idea, not to say that the distributors is a bad one. I do think it's a little less common, or at least I've yet to be involved with something where a distributor said, yeah, let's, pay for this post part only. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm sure
Yeah.
it does. I actually think I think going to actors and people who, for lack of a better term, have money, who are really interested in this subject, is actually a great way to go. Like, actually, I really come from, even at Delirio, even though ultimately a lot of the projects were sold to distributors at festivals or, later in the process, a lot of the financing was initially like independent financing, whether it's from a production company, RIP, but Braun Studios, that was a financier and production company, or just a very wealthy friend, when the guys were first just getting started out. At the end of the day, it's like, if they're going to help you finish it, like, it doesn't, I mean, it's cool if it's a distributor, but at the end of the day, you can,
Yeah.
take it to a festival. I would do that research of like, who are the actors, like you said, who are interested in this subject, and who are, are there other companies in other spaces too, who like might be interested in docs, like music based companies as well, who are like trying to get their hands dirty in it. Like, I mean, this is a big, I know I just said no distributors, but like, I know Sony Music Entertainment is really getting into docs now. Like, they're really trying to, and succeeding, obviously, but they have it's a big priority. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the actors seem to be receptive to. I mean, at least their staff seems to be receptive to it. I don't know if the actual.
You never know, right?
We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's just very exciting. And the director wants to make an Oscar play. He wants to get, go to film festivals, but and get it
Yes.
as in a limited release to qualify.
Yeah. I mean, for
And,
sure. Yeah, go ahead.
and like I said, like Brad Pitt his company just produced a jazz based biopic. I mean, a documentary on a jazz musician this year. That could be good or bad. It could be, well, we did that, we don't want to do it anymore, or yeah, give me more. And this one's about women, so maybe
Yeah,
might
I
be
think
something.
it's not good or bad. Yeah, I think it's like, it's smart in the way that you're thinking. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're not going to be able to control at the end of the day if he decides, well,
Yeah.
I just did jazz, so I'm not. I think, but your thinking is along the right lines of outside of the box, and not just like, well, I'm going to email HBO right now, and try to get the money. I don't know that that's really the way. I think it's more to approach, yeah, whether it's actors and independent financiers. And there is like crowdfunding, there is things like that, but I think it's like aim high first, for individual people, and then you can sort of go down the list. That's what I like to do, at least. It's like big swings first.
Yeah,
I think
me too.
everyone, that's sort of the way.
That's
Yeah,
great. Thank you very much.
of
I
course.
was gonna ask what you think of those investor platforms, not like Kickstarter, but some that actually people are investing in your film instead of just donating to them, or
Like, what do I think of
You mean
them?
like
Said,
Slated?
yeah, like things like that where you can make a reel and try to show what you have so people see the project and become a part of it.
yeah, that used to be a really, I think common way actually that docs were, in particular docs were made, even not docs, but like, hey, we did some of it, we don't have the money to finish it. Let's put it up. And I think it still happens. For as far as just my experience personally, it was always, we had all the funding from an independent financier before, but I think times where, it runs out, I think it makes a lot of sense to, if you've run the gamut of other options, post on those platforms. But I think I always think going to independent, financiers or people first is kind of a good first step. But I think that happens. I mean, all the time. I think it's a totally worthy road to take.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about developing documentaries. So what makes a good doc? Like what makes, what ideas can you kind of mine for finding subjects for documentaries? I mean, I know
Mhm.
a lot of people, you know, you have access to, you know, a lot of these, you know, bigger people, but like on the smaller scale, like instead of a
Yes.
Will Smith or something, where can we find ideas for making documentaries?
Yeah, I think you made kind of you're going on a track there that I think is interesting, which is I think a big thing with docs is the access. Like that's really, you know, what makes documentaries. And yes, sometimes that is Magic Johnson, right? But more often than not, it's actually a much smaller story. And you know, one of my favorite documentaries is called Murder at Middle Beach. I don't know if any of you guys have seen it on HBO, about a guy who he was this young filmmaker, just goes and investigates his mother's unsolved murder, and it's all, you know, him interviewing his family. It's all him going to law enforcement and kind of doing it all himself with friends, and it ended up on HBO. And I think the reason that was successful is it's a very personal story, and he has the access to the person. So I think if the story is great and the story is relatable and big, it doesn't so much matter the person. I think where it can get a little tricky is it'll feel like, okay, you know, there's someone famous, let's make a documentary about them, just, you know, for that sole fact. I think there has to be a real story, an angle, and a take. And for me, the way I find my ideas a lot of the time is reading articles, and not just necessarily, you know, oh, this huge New York Times article came out about this case or this person. But sometimes, I mean, I'm always on my Apple News app. I don't know about you guys, but like, and I'll see like something that looks super like, you know, almost like pulpy or you know, trashy as a story. And when you look deeper into it, it's like, this is actually something really interesting. Like I don't know how many of you heard the story of Rebecca Jones in Florida, who was like the COVID whistleblower. She had like a very public battle with Ron DeSantis. And I had seen her story a few times early on and reached out to her. And I think a lot of people felt like, you know, there was tabloidy or whatever, but it's actually a very big human story about the environment, about climate change, about healthcare, about all these things. So I think a lot of it is finding a subject or a person you're interested in, honestly, like reaching out to them. Like you don't really need to be someone famous or you know, have money to reach out to them and to start forming a relationship. Like I do that all the time without having backing or financing, and go from there. I know you have a Kathy, I know you have a question. I don't want to go on and on if it's something I can. Okay. But yeah, I just to basically finish up, I think there's not one answer, but I think it's like finding a story or a person that you connect to and being able to show a bigger picture thematically of that story, because that's sort of what's going to capture audiences, similar to scripted. But I think what a lot of buyers want to see is what's the big and I can give more examples of this in a minute, but like what's the big picture? Like why is this going to have broad appeal and not just be this really small story, you know, that nobody kind of ends up connecting to? And I can give more, you know, examples of that as well.
Kathy, how are you tonight?
Hi, I was, we have a completed doc, and we did the AFM shuffle, a few weeks ago, and, it's awesome, by the way. If you're shopping your film, it's a really great way to get to know the film or get to know the market and get to know what's going on. So, shout out to AFM if you're trying to we're trying to get a distributor at this point.
Yeah.
And but we would go into these meetings and it would be like, yes, we have a finished feature length doc, and it would be like, oh, it's finished, and then it's, oh, it's a doc. And then, well, who is it about? Well, it's about Frank Bay, who is an unrecognized blues singer. Oh, so without a known name tied to the doc, we're having a much harder sell, even though, as you're suggesting, we're showing the broader picture of healthcare and poverty and other things that surround a Black blues musician in Frank's life. And but it's a harder sell. I mean, if you're going into a meeting not having a name associated with your doc, it's going to be a much harder push to get there. Now we have a couple people that are interested in us, which is really good.
Yeah.
But I think what we heard a lot of was, oh, well, docs were really hot a couple years ago, but now they're cold. And, that's why if you don't have a name associated with it, we're not really going to be that interested. And what you should do is just go right to a streaming company. So anyway, so what is your position with respect to the marketability of docs? Like when people say to me, well, yeah, they were hot, a couple years ago, but now nobody's really interested in docs.
Yeah, I think that's like kind of BS. To be totally honest, to be blunt, I'm not super, and I'll admit, I'm coming from a place that's not, I think a lot of people say a lot of things and they're like, this is hot now and this is not, and now this is what people, and I'm not saying there's no truth to it. I do think like with the strike, people were like, there's going to be this huge boom of docs and unscripted, and like I think that didn't necessarily happen, but I just think things are cyclical, and I think there are a lot of docs that are very popular. I just simply don't agree with that. I do think what they're saying, don't, I agree with you, on your, perspective. I don't agree with whoever you were pitching to's perspective. I think people are buying docs all the time. I think people in general in the last year or so are being extremely careful with their money in a way that has not been the case with docs before. So I do think, to your point, it is harder to get it sold. I will tell you, if you're in the room, like the fact that you got into the room is pretty cool. Like, honestly, you can't guarantee any of this, right? So I think even getting into the room is amazing. So first of all, that's great. I do think one thing I'm going to suggest to you that is, I don't want to say it's controversial, but I had sort of picked it up, in the last few years. One strategy is to simply show a sizzle and a deck and not actually say that sometimes when there's a full movie to watch, I think sometimes distributors feel like, oh crap, like I'm not really going to be able to put my stamp on this, which is what a lot of them want. Like, I don't think it's like straight up lying. I think it would be pretty hard to hide, like we've done an entire production. But I think just saying, we're working on it, we're wrapping up, we're sort of going through the edit, want the right place for this. So I think that's one approach. Is to sort of not make it so like, here's a link to the entire film and here you go. And I weirdly, that seems to work sometimes with sales. Yeah, that's one sort of, logistical strategy. And I think in terms of, you're not wrong that it helps to have names attached. At Delirio, we had a small doc called The All-Americans that was about two LA high school football teams. And it's a really lovely story. It's kind of like, with not a named director, there's not a lot of oomph to it. And we had, we looked up, okay, like who is really interested in, Latino culture in LA, like who would relate to this? And we came up with Becky G, the singer, and licensed a song from her and had her just come on as an EP. Like, she didn't act, it's not like she was on set doing stuff. She was kind of just a name EP. We looked at like, can we do a cover of Fortunate Son? Like, what are like sort of the big things in other ways we can do, like adding music, just adding other little things that feel big. A name EP is one thing, and it doesn't have to be like Becky G, the singer, either. It could be like we're talking about, music here, I think, once again. And I think there's a lot of, artists or people who work at these companies or independent producers who might be interested. That's like one way I would say you could add some name value, is by seeing who would be into this. Yeah. And I also think, I think just in the pitching process, I think it is kind of being like, we have this thing that we shot it, and we're working on the edit. I think could sometimes weirdly be a better sell than
it's finished.
this is how it is, and like this is how it's gonna, not the saying you're saying it like that, but I think it comes across that way, like take it or leave it. And they want to feel like this is an HBO film, you know, this is our thing. We want to be able to give notes, right? You know, on the edit, we want to be able to be involved and change things. So as long as that's something you're open to, you know, by the way, I would recommend downplaying the completion of it a little bit.
Interesting. That's because on some cases, I think they wanted to know we weren't asking them for money, right? So
Yes.
we have a completed film that's ready to roll.
Mhm.
And saying it was a completed film was like, oh great, you know, we can put this out now.
Yeah.
But on your other hand, we're not getting their buy-in by having them brand us in some way. And also the named issue that you're talking about is really interesting, because we went to like Questlove and some of it's shot in Philadelphia, some of the local people here from Philadelphia as a funding hope. But now that we're finished, maybe their association might be really great. Because there is a lot of music, so maybe we could go back to those folks and see if they might want to be associated with it. So that's okay. That's great. Thank you. Those are some great ideas.
Yeah, like people love a music doc, I will say. I mean, I think like just getting even a little bit of a name, you know, will really take you a long way. But yeah, keep me posted, and I'll try to think of some other. I wish I had some more like, you know, ideas off the top of my head of specific music people, but that's great.
That's great. That's great.
Mhm.
So I was wondering, you talked about, you know, finding a story and then reaching out to somebody. What's that process like? Like, how do you like lure them
Yeah.
turning over their
Very
life?
schmoozy. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like weirdly the same as like schmoozing someone at a party, I guess, in its own way. Usually, by the way, the other thing I should say is it's not like you reach out and then the next day they just immediately respond to you. Like a lot of the time it can take, you're like, I've made a movie, I know. But like it can be like 6 months, you know, it can be a long time of getting this person to respond. I mean, I've actually done a lot where I've like reached out to people who are in prison and things like that, where of course for other reasons it's just like complicated to get to them or get a response. So to me, the way I usually approach it is like, hi, you know, I'm a documentary producer. I'm really interested in developing, you know, the best way to tell your story with you, so that doesn't need to be that verbatim, but something that kind of says, I'm not really looking to just like take your story or tell it in, you know, from what their perspective will be the wrong way. I actually want to collaborate with you to have the highest level of journalistic integrity to this. Journalistic integrity are some good like terms to throw out there, I find. And I think it's generally keeping that person at ease, like kind of slowly easing them into like, hey, do you mind just having a chat? Because I think when times where I've said in email, like, hi, I want to make a documentary about you, where it almost feels like a yes or no question, it's like a quicker no, you know, like it's so easy for them to just be like, no, like no thanks. I think when it's like, you know, I'm really interested in your story, is there any way we could hop on a quick call to just, you know, I could introduce myself and just sort of tell you a little more about me. I think that's a good approach, just like an ease into it. And I would say really, you know, if you do get that on that phone call, it's like really have like done your homework. I'm not saying memorize, you know, their whole life story and quote it back to them, but finding a few key points, like, you know, when I don't know, like when, you know, when you talked about how your mother died, you know, that really moved me, because when my mom passed away, I went through a similar thing. I'm just making that up, but whatever the situation may be, finding the human connection, because that's what's ultimately going to make them want to work with you. And I would say that's as far as the initial approach goes, like finding their email and finding their contact, things like that can be half the battle for sure. Facebook True People search is a very hit or miss. You do have to call a lot of like people who are not them to get through. But finding, you know, going directly to that person, if it is someone more in the public eye, who really may actually have a lot of interest, you know, or offers or something like that. I personally also think it's worthwhile to go to, you know, a lawyer or a publicist of theirs. I know, you know, people don't always love to do that, but I think it's a way in where if you had just gone to them directly, in some cases where they're bigger, they may just like delete your email. I do think people who are, there's an example, I won't say too much about it yet, but there is a certain true crime case that's very much in the public eye that I'm trying to develop into a doc, where the person involved is not a celebrity, but there's someone who, you know, after this situation happened, you know, wrote a book or is doing speaking and things like that. Someone like that will respond to you, you know, more likely. But if it's a real celebrity, I think, you know, going through a lawyer or a publicist is a good way to go. And I can talk more about like specific things to say, but I think ultimately it's like making that connection and just not saying like, hi, can I make a documentary about you? Yes or no. And sort of almost what I like to call pushing a no, like, because then they're just going to be like, no. I think, you know, the phone call first and is a good way, but then I can go into more detail.
Okay, and then like, what if you discover something that like nobody else knows about? How are you able to keep that a secret from other people while you're trying to develop it with, it seems,
Yeah.
seems like stealing ideas is easier in the doc world than like in scripted.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
sure how
I
that,
think, yeah, I feel like with docs, I mean, as much as it's like, yeah, try not to have someone steal your idea. I actually think we've sort of seen with docs with like Firefest and like Murdoch and all these things, like there can be more than one thing about it. I mean, ultimately, the one, in my opinion, with the most access is usually going to be the most successful, right? But there are places like, for instance, Netflix, or, you know, I guess going back talking about studios or streamers and things like that. A lot of the time, they'll just not even wait for the access. They'll just call the production company they work with and say, we're doing this, and then not even worry about it. But yeah, I think in terms of keeping it secret, I mean, yeah, just like mum's the word, you know, I think just not telling people. I truthfully, I think everything has a way of getting out. That's just, maybe I'm cynical, but I feel like, you know, things get out into the universe and you kind of have to not focus too much on someone's, you know, stealing your idea or something happening, because it's a reality. Like it's just a reality of the business, in my opinion, is that it can happen. It can, I mean, I'm working on helping somebody develop something now that I was brought into later, where this guy, you know, he has a competing offer for, you know, the same idea they had. It's just like, yeah, more than one person read a major article, you know, and sometimes it's just, hopefully you have that relationship with the person where they say, you know what, I only want to work with you. That's the only way I feel comfortable. So I would say don't let the stealing the idea part not keep you up too much at night, but just focus more on the relationship that you have with the subject.
Alan, you have a follow-up?
Oh,
My turn. I'm sorry. I didn't. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks again. Natalie, could you tell us what the distribution landscape is like, or what strategy would be good for a distribution plan as far as this? Like, what's the way? How is it done? Do you get a sales agent that does both domestic and foreign, or do a lot of documentaries do the domestic themselves and farm out or what companies maybe that you know of that are specifically great at documentaries?
Yeah, I mean, you know, in terms of sales agents, in terms of like once you have a distributor, so the way I think of sales agents more so is sort of before and helping you. I mean, one company, by the way, you know, before you go, when you're trying to get a distributor that is great, is called Submarine. A guy called Josh Braun, who's a kind of not the actor, but a different, very big Josh Braun, is great. And I'm sure, you know, he's also involved, you know, maybe when it comes to getting a distributor, but there are places like that, you know, where they take a fee, you know, they help you take your project out and that kind of thing. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I think you're muted.
You're muted again, Alan. Alan, you're muted.
Submarine charges a fee?
Yes, they do. Yeah. I mean, you know, it depends. For instance, if you're like, hey, I don't have a lot of money and this is my first movie, you know, it's not going to be the same as a major production company. I think they sort of work with you on that. But there are companies like that. I'm more familiar with them when it comes to like, getting distribution, if that makes sense, versus like once once there is a distributor. One company that does really great international on docs is AGC, and they're also a production company as well, and they do both scripted and doc. I think that Magnolia is great. They got it was the domestic rights for Mike Wallace. I mean, to be truthful with you, I think every company, sort of contrary to something we heard a few minutes ago, is interested in docs and, trying to find what docs that they can do. Peacock is great. I'm working on something for them now. And yeah, I mean, I think in terms of international, I've had some, I think, where there wasn't actually an international component to it. But yeah, I mean, I think in terms of, I just want to make sure I'm answering your question, Alan. Are you talking about once you, like, what's the best way to put out the documentary? Like once.
Well, that's another question. I mean, it was basically what companies specialize in that, and how does it done usually with documentary?
Yeah, I mean, another one is, it so runs the gamut. Like sometimes it's like, you'll sell like, for instance, sometimes it's pre-sold, right? Like there's a distributor on board, from the beginning, they have their plan, right? Like Peacock, I'm working with Peacock and Imagine on something right now. So Imagine is the production company, Peacock's the distributor. They have a plan from day one, it'll be released on a streamer. But sometimes distributors will also say like, we actually want to release it at a festival first, even though it's pre-sold, to kind of make a splash and then do a limited theatrical release. Other companies, I don't know if I said A24 yet, but they have a huge doc.
They all seem to have documentary sections.
Yeah, I mean, I would say with them, I mean, the reason I love them is, they also release their own stuff. Although I think they did just sign something with HBO to have, might just be their scripted, but their content streaming on HBO. Where else there's like, another, there's like, I think HBO does a ton. I mean, Showtime does a ton still. They've had some weird restructuring, I would say, that's like kind of impacted their slate of docs quite a bit, but they were great. I think Hulu I've worked with a bunch. Yeah, Hulu is a really amazing place for it. And a lot of the time I will say, not to keep like taking away from, who are these distributors, but a lot of the time too, it is like, what sales agent or what company are, you also working with that has that relationship with them. But yeah, I think in terms of a release, as you might know, unless it's, what was the doc about the guy who had to cut his own arm off? Or like what was it again? Or can't remember. Unless you have a massive, huge doc, usually the release is somewhat limited, right? Like usually it's not like a massive release. That's why when I don't know how many of you have gotten to like the licensing archive phase, which is like literally the most expensive thing, you can do limited theatrical for a reason, right? Because it is a limited theatrical.
Well, that's the thing. Isn't it best to retain the rights and enter into licensing deals with these streamers? And
you can, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's terms from, I think there's some that are like up to 18 years. Sometimes I see these and I'm like, God, I wonder what's going to be happening in 18 years from now. When you look at those licenses, like I could be dead then. But yes, I think that, you absolutely can do that. That's some places like, Reggie was with Prime Video and Amazon, and they, really specifically wanted to structure it as a, as a license deal. And so for those reasons, there were like different deliverable requirements, there were different things depending on it. I think honestly, it just depends on the doc. I don't think that's like the main, I think it's like, if you have a great place, like I think that, sort of being open to the deal they want to structure it in that way is sort of okay. But there are some, like I worked on a different music doc that I can't say yet because it's not out, but like we licensed a lot of the footage from this same company, and our agreement with them is for 12 years, and then there's an option to re-up, and it's like you know, when things aren't in perpetuity, it's a little, I mean, to me, I'm a little like, ugh, like.
And they're
that's kind of
exclusive
great.
too, right?
What
They're
was that?
exclusive. They're exclusive, right? These.
Yeah, I mean, for, you know, for that time in this context, you know, of like having a doc about this, but sometimes I'm just, to me, I never quite, I was like, why wouldn't you do everything in perpetuity? But I think it's just sort of I don't think it's like we all need to do it this way. But to me, I always felt like, yeah, I mean, you know, it just hasn't been long enough for any of these things to come to pass, right? You know, where it was that period that ended. But to me, I'm just like, yeah, I mean, I don't know, this movie's going to be out forever, right? I mean, there is no, like, it's not like someone's going to put the rabbit back in the hat. So I always, you know, with rights and things like that, I think perpetuity is good. But I also think these are things, you know, having an entertainment lawyer as well, like someone who you can get for like, you know, not super expensive, you know, someone who will do it partially as a favor. As far as the nitty gritty of this part of it, you know, when a company comes to you with a license deal or, you know, whatever it may be, I do think it's very much worth getting those opinions on as well, because there can be things in the fine, you know, you want to make sure you have, you know, as much rights as you want. I would advise investing in that as well, because there's some things that are sort of speculative and then there's some things that are like legal facts. So I would sort of advise you know, getting an entertainment lawyer involved at that stage, you know, where it feels like it's getting really real with a company, and then just have somebody on an hourly or on retainer. I think that's, you know, those are big contracts that take multiple months to close and require a close eye.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Evan, you have a question?
Yeah, hi there. Hi, it's so nice to meet you. Thanks for doing this. This has been awesome so far. So we actually won the Best Documentary of 2023 at the Big Apple Film Festival, which is how I heard about this. And we did a table of our own, and we weren't able to make it, which was just such a disappointment and such a bummer, but we were watching on social media and everything, and it seemed so cool. And I wanted to ask you, having already won an award and having submitted to other festivals, what do you think a good path like that we could stick to as first-time documentary filmmakers to try to really make sure that our film gets out there to as many people as possible? You know, we have been playing it publicly in a couple of theaters in different parts of the country. We're planning an online screening with a couple of university collaborations because it's an educational film. But we want to make sure we aren't taking any steps that will, like, you know, hurt us in the future. We want to make sure we're doing everything we can to push the film forward to get out as many people as possible. So I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, and so you're, just to clarify, you basically at this point submitted to all the festivals that you feel like would make sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah, gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I think you're doing all the right things in terms of, you know, getting it out there. I think, like, do you, you know, I'm curious, like, you mentioned, I feel like you mentioned university or school. Am I crazy?
No, that's right.
Okay, yeah. I'm curious if there is, like, you know, a program in your school that has, you know, alumni doc people or alumni doc directors or things like that, because sometimes getting people to post about it, you know, who are in the doc world is a big thing. Like, I think that is, you know, kind of getting introduced to someone who can help you put it out there. So, like, for instance, if I'm literally just making this up, I'm sure it's not the case, but there's a doc director I worked with a bunch named Avi Belkin, right, who did like Mike Wallace is Here and No One Saw a Thing. So, you know, if there was someone like that where, you know, they're an alum of your school, or, you know, someone who knows them, and getting that person to get excited about it and post about it and be like, hey, I just watched this, you know, great doc. Did you say you put it on Vimeo, or you?
We will, and I'm not in film school. We've done it with Stanford University and like a couple of universities in California, in the Bay Area where we are. So, but I do kind of know some people in the industry. The director and I have both been meeting people, especially through film festivals. So, I mean, like, I think that's really, really good advice. I'm almost more just worried about, like, what are some mistakes? Like what, like, I don't know, just
Yeah,
as
oh,
an
like, yeah,
example,
what
some,
did you not? Yeah, I mean, I mean,
yeah,
as much as I just said, like, yeah, did you put it on Vimeo? Like, I do think like too much of that can sometimes be
yeah,
almost
we,
like, oh my God, like they're like trying so hard, to, I mean,
that's
yes.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I think that can be, it's weird because sometimes it can like go, people are like, whoa, oh my God. And then so-and-so purchases the rights for it. But other times it's like, okay, like this is kind of being thrown in my face. Like, I don't want to watch like a whole movie right now. I think looking into, God, I feel like it's like finding these, 6 degrees of separation, all that in terms of what you should not do. Yeah, like I don't think there's like too many missteps, to be totally honest with you, like that you can take. I think, obviously, like looking at if you do get offers for things, like I kind of just alluded to, like looking at those deals and not getting like overly excited and maybe like setting yourself up for the wrong thing. Or I mean, I would say one thing, and it's not so much a misstep as much as it is like a getting your hopes up kind of thing. I think a lot of people will be like, I can, make this happen. And it's like, it's great if they can, but a lot of times, like they're saying that they don't know, if it will or not. And I think it's like being kind of level headed and realizing, okay, I'm going to have as many irons in the fire as possible. But I don't know for sure, if any of them are going to pan out. And just, I think as far as mentally, that's just like not quite what you were asking, but I think like that's, one way to just kind of keep yourself in check is like, if it happens, it happens. It's kind of like when you interview for a job, right? You're like, kind of have to like let it go after that, like, and like wait to hear back, like rather than, getting overly excited. Another thing, I mean, you said, and then I'm sorry, just to clarify, did you say that you said you couldn't did you you made the film, like or you did not?
yeah. So I'm the
Yeah,
producer on the film.
yeah, you made the
And
film.
then,
That's fully done. Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, it's done, and it won 2023 Best Documentary
Right.
at
Okay.
Big Apple. So we were pleasantly surprised. I'll say that we're kind of in like the opposite boat of, you're saying don't get your hopes up, and so the director is a sci-fi writer, and then I'm an actor and a filmmaker in the Bay Area, and like both of us have, he's like I think maybe he just turned 50 or so. I guess this is being recorded, so he's gonna hate me if I get that wrong. But we're both like old enough to be like, we've had a lot of disappointments. So
Yeah.
I don't think either of us are really thinking like have our hopes too high. I'm almost thinking that we are trying to make sure that we're like being as slow and cautious and smart as possible.
Yeah.
But I worry about that part of us, you know what I mean? Like being
Like,
too
don't be
cautious.
too-
Yeah.
Yeah.
So but I think what you're
Yeah.
saying makes perfect sense. And also, yeah, avoiding, we were both just like, no, we're keeping it off of all streaming platforms until somebody, more important than us comes and says, come, dig into this one.
Do you guys have, I don't know, how much the director had done, before or not, like any kind of representation or anything like that?
He has he has like a sci or like an author book writer's agent, I believe.
Great, because so one thing I would advise is I find that I've talked about this in a scripted, one of these I did a few months ago where people were, I was sort of like, oh, well, who was your book agent? Like they would be like, I published a book, but I don't know, how to get into the room with people for scripts. And I'm like, well, use the 6 degrees of separation tactic, right? It's like there's a sci-fi writer agent. I'm not saying that's a documentary unscripted agent, like no, but do they know some? Probably, right?
Probably,
like I don't know if you've approached, but I think it's just like going into it a little bit like outside the box like that. Like who do we know that isn't like, I do think, not to undermine the title of this whole talk, but I do think sometimes people feel like, well, the only thing that I can do is go to a studio. The only thing I can do is, reach out to a studio or have it happen in this exact way that a doc should be made. And that's just not, reality a lot of the time. I think it's looking at the people around you in other ways, right? Like you both have been, in this business to some extent. I mean, maybe he's 50, maybe a little bit longer, but who are the people who have, access to agents and have access to get it in front of people? I actually would, if you haven't yet, if you have, sorry, but I would go to the literary agent. That would be my advice as a next step and just see who.
Awesome. Well, then in that case, it sounds like we are on the right track.
Yeah, totally.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Do you mind telling us what your doc's about?
Yeah, sure. So it's called A Table of Our Own. You can see it, the trailer and some extra information at atableofourown.org. It's all about psychedelic medicine, specifically in the Black community. I'm actually the only white person that was working on it, and I met the director Aize in a very random way in a different film set, and he's just like has such a huge amount of passion and care and empathy for the world around him, that I ended up volunteering on the documentary for about 2 years. And once we finally said, okay, I think this is done, and we started sending it off, and we began kind of like winning awards. The BAF one was the first really major one that we won, but we have had sold out theaters in Oakland, which is where we're from, Portland, Atlanta. He was just over in the UK. Yeah, so
Yeah.
like
Cool.
there's been a really large like reaction to it, and that feels so good, because it's always been just such like a deep passion project, and we want to make sure that it really does get out to as many people as possible.
Great. It sounds so interesting. No, congratulations on, the
Thank you.
accolade that it has gotten. I think that's all a really good omen. And I think it's just about like getting it into the right hands. You aren't maybe the obvious hands, but the people sort of already in your circle. But yeah, let me know. Yeah, I'd love to check it out too. If that's possible. If not, I won't post it on Vimeo, but
Thanks. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll definitely
I
follow up
am
with
gonna
you about
post it on my Instagram, but other than that, yeah.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Thank you, Natalie.
Cool.
Yeah, and are there film festivals just for documentaries, and is that a good piece for trying to get distribution to?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've mostly been familiar, with the ones that we all know, right? Like the things have gone to like Sundance and South by Southwest and Tribeca. I think there probably are. I think a lot of it too. One thing is just submitting to, looking those up, like what are the ones that take a lot of docs and what are the smaller ones, like more local festivals and things like that can get that first set of eyes. That's a good question. I'm not sure that there are specific ones, but I do know almost all of them are heavily interested in documentaries. The spirit of festivals, in my opinion, in general is sort of very doc-ish, it is kind of the indie feeling. But yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, I know that there are Docs Without Borders, and if you go into Film Freeway, we've really looked at hopefully festivals that are heavily documentary oriented.
Yeah.
So internationally, you can find things that are very documentary specific. That's been really helpful for us. The one thing I want to say is, I think we expected when we went to the festivals that the world would just be laying gold at our feet, and that was what we needed to do in order to get the distribution. And that's not how it works. Even when you're talking to the distributors, they want to know about how many, your social media criteria and the different how many people are following the movie. Frank Bay, how many people follow his website, how many they're interested in, where not just, and we, you get the awards and that's terrific, but that's only sort of one gating issue when you're talking to the service. Oh, great, you've been through the festivals, that's really good, these are great awards. Now, how else can I connect this into the world? And just one other real quick point. We want to get the film out there as broadly as possible, because this is a passion project for us as well. And one thing we worried about, particularly with the streaming aggregators, was that we were going to get thrown into a black hole and nobody would ever find our movie. So one of the things we've been talking to the distributors about is how would they address that? What kinds of things can they do to help our movie get raised up a little bit out of the pack so that people will know that it's there?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make. I think it's true that, right, I think anyone now can pretty much pay to be on Amazon, right? Like, or there's, so many platforms where you can just put it up and yeah, people might find it like, by happenstance, but I do think that there is that real possibility of it getting lost. To some extent, this might sound bad. I sort of think sometimes it is about getting that first one out there in general. And I think it can be okay if it, like, I don't know, there's so many directors that, in both spaces that make it, or they have a big project and then you sort of were like, oh, what else did they do? And it's like something you've never heard of in your entire life. But the reason that they were able to do this thing that you did hear of is from, that other one, it did get buried, but it was seen by somebody, it did get them the connections to be known by somebody, to make that next project. I'm not saying that's, I think it's super admirable to say, we don't want to just be released and then no one ever sees it and it's like it never happened. I agree with you. Although I just think it's also not the worst thing in the world if initially that happens, because then at least you can say, you know what, it was on Netflix. It's about this. It was a great project, now, working on developing my next one. That was such a great experience to really, get my feet wet with it. I'm just, just to look on the bright side of something going into oblivion. I think it's, not always, it's not always like that bad. I think it's a lot of people, I think, have those, and truthfully, like, it's like, wait, what? Like, they did that? I've never heard of it in my life, but it doesn't actually matter once other things have come out. So I don't know. Yeah. Which is, we don't want to say that about things we're passionate about, right? Like, we're like, we want the world to see this project we worked on and we care about, but it just may not always play out that way. And it's sort of a stepping stone to something else. That's just one perspective. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Here's just a random question about, have you ever made a documentary where you go in with a point of view and then while you're in there finding out that it's completely different and the take you were interested in the beginning has changed? Is that?
Yes. I can't, it's more that the take was like not quite, the material may have not totally been there to support the take. I can't really talk about that one, but yes, it does happen. Like, and I think a lot of that is, sometimes I think you want to dive into a story or like kind of pick up one little part of it as the angle. And it's like, you get really excited, like, this is what it's going to be. But I think, I know we don't have too much time, but one thing is, doing a lot of research to really make sure that there is material, right, to support the angle and the take that you're giving. That's one version, I think, Andy, of what you're asking. Is it's kind of like you thought it was you thought it was going to be one thing and it's actually not, for a bad reason. But there's also the other version of like, that's part of making docs, is like you discover more, whether it is a true crime case or a person, about a person's background, something like that makes it go in a different direction. That's one of the exciting things about making docs in a way versus this is the script and this is what we're doing. It's like, that's why the edit always goes way over budget, right? It's like, that's like, it was 80 times longer than we thought because we found it kind of in the edit, or like we found a story there or we found it earlier and then it needed to change in the edit. So that's one reason it's good to try to keep people realistic about what these doc budgets are now. I think people still think it's like $1.5 million, which, like, not saying it never can be, but realistically, I think, there's a lot of archive, there's a lot of like edit, there's a lot of ways you find the story that's, it's different. So yeah, I think it happens.
Okay, well, that just about wraps up the hour. Thank you so much, Natalie. It's been a great, informative hour, and thank you all for your questions.
Yeah, thank you guys. This was so fun. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Natalie.
Of course.
Thanks. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was really great.
A lot of great
Thank you so
information.
much.
All right.
Nice
Bye,
meeting you.
guys.
Good luck with all your docs, people. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.